So yeah, my name is Clay Cutting. I am the lead technician, I guess, right now for the Prince Edward Island Invasive Species Council. You may know Cassidy Matheson with the 2 Billion Trees program. She's our former technician, so we definitely miss her. So we'll just get right into it. Hemlock woolly adulgid is our topic today. So it's PEI's most unwanted, well, certainly one of the most unwanted here. It's characterized by these tiny wool-like balls here. They kind of look like the end of a Q-tip right at the base of the needle on a hemlock tree. Basically this thing inserts its mouth parts and sits there for life, builds a little house around itself, so nothing else can eat it. But why are we concerned? So what it's doing is it acts very much like an aphid. It inserts its mouth parts into the tree and starts sucking the sap out. And that wound causes the tree to abort its buds, unfortunately. So as the new growth does not build up over time, the tree will unfortunately die. So it's introduced from East Asia to Virginia in the United States in 1951, and it's kind of spread outward since. And the reason we're so concerned is because of its devastating impact on our eastern hemlock populations here. So over 90% of eastern hemlocks that have been affected by hemlock woolly adulgid today are dead. So that's a very devastating statistic. The insect doesn't move around on its own. It has a flighted stage of its life cycle that actually isn't able to go forward here in Canada. So that's a good thing for us, but it still can move around by other means. So birds, beetles, food products, and such like. There's many ways that this thing can get around, and indeed it does. So it's got a very complicated life cycle. Suffice to say that there are 2 generations, the lower wintering generation and the spring generation here. It only has 1 stage of life cycle where it's actually moving. So right here, the crawler is the only mobile stage of the life cycle. So this is the only time it's actually going to be moving around, and it's the time when we foresee the most spread can occur. So this time of year does have a lot of crawlers around, so this is a prime time for spread, and it's also a prime time to monitor. So what are you looking for? Well, we've got some pictures of the guy here. The top left-hand corner, these are its eggs. So they're kind of a tiny orangish orb with the ovisac stripped away, the egg sac. So this is the egg sac to the top right here. And right in the center egg sac, tiny brown bug, and that is the crawler. That's the mobile stage of the life cycle. When it finally finds a place to feed, it sets down its mouth parts, and it looks like this little black fleck here. And kind of chills out for the whole summer, not moving, not eating. It's in a dormant stage. But in the fall, it'll kind of come out of this dormancy and begin to produce this ovisac and become much more visible. On the bottom right, we have an adult, and this is a very highly magnified adult. And I just chose this photo because you can really see the mouth. A long thread-like appendage. So I did mention that it has a flighted stage in North America. It is unable to reproduce. It doesn't have the suitable spruce host that it requires to go through its life cycle, but that's what it looks like, that little fruit fly-like thing on the slide there. And on the right, this is a picture of a very heavy infestation of hemlock woolly adulgid. So you'd likely see in an earlier infestation far fewer of these white woolly masses, the ovisac it's called. So what do these guys affect? Well, in eastern Canada, pretty much exclusively eastern hemlock, but it can affect other kinds of hemlock. And those 2 kinds of spruce, which are underlined there, those are the 2 kinds of spruce which would actually allow the flighted stage to reproduce. So if you were thinking of planting any of those, definitely don't. It would not be a good thing. So some of the things you're going to be looking for when you're out and about looking for hemlock woolly adulgid. The top left there, woolly masses at the base of needles on the underside of twigs, usually in fallen branches or in the outer canopy or in the upper canopy if you do have access to that. That's where you want to target your surveys first. Some of the earlier signs and symptoms are the discoloration of needles and loss of needles. And we also see a kind of a graying of the tree. So if you know the kind of hue of a hemlock on the landscape, it's a little bit of a bluish green. It tends to go a little bit grayer in this under this infestation here. As the infestation progresses, you're going to see things like crown and branch dieback, canopy loss, and ultimately the death of the hemlock tree. So with any invasive species, there are lookalikes, something to confuse you, something to make identification a little bit more difficult. So what I want to highlight here is that there's no such thing as a bad report. If you think you see hemlock woolly adulgid or you're not sure, we'd much rather get that report and have it be a false positive than actually not get that report and have it be something that we would have rather have heard about. So some of the things which may confuse you, we've got pine bark adelgids, spruce spider mites, oak skeletonizers, spittlebugs, balsam woolly adelgids, mealybugs, even fake spider webs at Halloween might confuse you. So there's always something to look for. But again, there's no such thing as a bad report, though if you are seeing symptoms on a tree that's not eastern hemlock, again, it's probably not hemlock woolly adulgid, almost certainly not. So what does eastern hemlock do for us here? Why do we not want to lose this? Why do we want to keep this in the landscape? It's not really the most economically beneficial tree. Not many people use it for a prime source of lumber, I would say, although it is used in barns and outbuildings and such like. It is historically a source of tannin, so it's the main source for tanning leather. So there's a lot of different things it's been used for historically, but we can make tannin synthetically now, so we don't really need hemlock. So we have these really unique microclimates that are created in a hemlock stand. It's a very moist environment. If you're up in a field on a hot day and you dip down into a hemlock stand, it'll probably be a little bit cooler down there. And if you're on a cold winter's day and you dip down into the hemlock stand, it might even be a little bit warmer. So there's a far less broad range, a narrower range of temperatures that are experienced here, and that is relied upon by many species at risk, like salmonids, like lichen species and such like. You can see where hemlocks are lost, major changes in the way water moves. It's a regulator of the way water moves through an area. It can take up extra water in times of flood, and in times of drought, it can keep the area more moist. When you lose hemlocks, generally they grow around things like sugar maple, yellow birch, beech, these things. So we probably see a trend towards a more hardwood dominant environment thereafter. We can see things like a loss of biodiversity, a loss of habitat and nutrients for these species that rely on hemlock. And in terms of my thinking, it opens up room for invasive species to move in and to grow. So disturbs our native plant communities, makes them less resilient. So how long do we have? It's a good question. It's not a question I can readily answer. You can see where it is on this map here. Around about halfway up Nova Scotia, it is occupying at this particular time. It may already be here, so that's why we have to get out and monitor right now, but it may take as long as maybe 25 years to grow. I would expect it would probably be here within 10 years, I would think. It's first discovered down here in 1951, and you can see how it's been able to spread, even though it can't fly on its own, quite significantly, and even over significant distances, as you see there. So it was first discovered in Nova Scotia in 2017, but it's believed that it was there for around 10 years before that initial discovery. That's just due to the significant level of impact that they already saw in Nova Scotia. The closest observations that we have to Prince Edward Island are in Bedford and St. Croix, Nova Scotia. And there was more recently an eDNA trap detection, basically a trap that detects environmental DNA, any fragments of the Hemlock woolly adulgid that may float down onto this trap, a skin cell or Hemlock woolly adulgid dandruff or something that floats down onto these traps can be detected. They weren't able to actually confirm that observation as far as to find where that DNA came from, but that's a significant jump from Bedford and St. Croix all the way up to Truro, so we're hoping that that was a false positive. So if it doesn't move on its own, how does it move? Hemlock woolly adulgid needs help to move, and if we can identify the ways that an invasive species moves, we can address those and perhaps regulate that spread. So because they are principally moved by other things, we have a significant opportunity here to regulate potentially for the spread of Hemlock woolly adulgid. So it can't fly, so it uses other people's wings. So you have the stork here carrying the baby Hemlock woolly adulgid there. That is essentially the primary method of spread for Hemlock woolly adulgid. Most invasive species, you have man moving them around, but birds seem to be the primary mover of Hemlock woolly adulgid. Moving firewood, nursery stock, and hemlock wood can be another way to facilitate spread. But yeah, migratory birds, it happens that their northward migration coincides with the emergence of those crawlers, the mobile stage of the life cycle that I mentioned earlier, and so they're able to hitch a ride on these birds and fly away to faraway lands. Wind dispersal could also be a source of spread, but more so localized because the birds are moving specifically from tree to tree rather than just moving. It's a more directed source of spread, and so we foresee that migratory birds are going to be the primary source of spread. So this is just a kind of a map of my brain and how I foresee these invasive species will come into Prince Edward Island. We are very fortunate here in PEI that we have the Northumberland Strait to kind of keep a lot of the riffraff out, I guess you could say. So we have these main portals of entry, and those are where I would expect human-mediated action to bring Hemlock woolly adulgid into the province. And of course, we have our migratory birds and our wind spread. So what are we doing to keep hemlock woolly adelgid off Prince Edward Island? Basically everything I could think of that we can afford. Currently we're engaging in the creation of a framework for managing invasive species on PEI, and this is a big part of it. So the earlier we detect invasive species, the more likely we are to be able to successfully respond to them. And so hemlock woolly adelgid is no exception. We are promoting monitoring activities because, yeah, we're only 2 people here at the PEI Invasive Species Council, so we do need outside support, people taking on monitoring on their own properties. So if you do have hemlocks on your property, typically consider using some of the monitoring techniques which are available on our website. I'll talk about the simplest one here today. We're going to be conducting outreach activities, so yeah. If you don't know about it, then you can report it to us, so that's absolutely foundational for any invasive species work. We're hoping to work with regulatory agencies to improve preventative regulatory controls, collecting that best, most up-to-date information, and identifying where we should be treating in future when it arrives. This is, I don't know if you guys have seen these, but it's a very cool initiative we have. When you come back from Prince Edward Island, we have these bins in Wood Island and Borden Carlton. And if you have firewood with you that you perhaps brought back by accident, you can dump it in one of these bins, scan a coupon on the side, and that'll give you a free bundle of firewood at any provincial park campground. So you won't be out any wood, and you'll be doing your part to spread around forest pests. So what can you guys do to help? Well, you can let us know where your hemlocks are and encourage your friends to do so too. Conduct monitoring activities on eastern hemlocks on your property. Don't move firewood, hemlock wood, or live hemlock trees from back off island back to Prince Edward Island. Promote the health of individual hemlocks on your property through good silviculture practice. Collect cones. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And yeah, spread the word. My friends always get an earful out on a hike about hemlock woolly adelgid and all sorts of invasive species. This is my buddy Blake. He's very good to listen to me. This is another one of my friends there, Joel. Again, I take them out to hemlocks a lot. So we really want to know where eastern hemlocks are in PEI. This will allow us to make a more directed response. So I'm sure a lot of you have eastern hemlocks on your property. We would like to know about that, basically. So the data is going to be used in the event of an infestation on Prince Edward Island. If we know where all the hemlocks are in the landscape, we can go to those hemlocks and actually very effectively monitor to get a full delimitation of the total infested area, and then we can make a response based on that. But if we have to kind of search those hemlocks out in the landscape, it might take longer, and time is of the essence in this case. So if you guys want, you can forward your data to me. Basically, I just need to know your address and that you have hemlocks, as it would be as simple as it gets. But if you have any other information, how many trees, the age of the trees, even if they're planted from a nursery, where they came from the nursery, any relevant information really. You can give that to me here today if you want, or you can contact me by email, peinvasives@gmail.com. So monitoring, as I said, we're only 2 here at the PEI Invasive Species Council, so we do need some outside support to look around for this guy. There's a lot of hemlock trees on Prince Edward Island, and although I would love to get out and monitor all of them, I simply can't. Monitoring techniques vary. We have 4 main monitoring techniques. Visual sampling, which is just going out and looking at the trees for signs of hemlock woolly adelgid in your eyes with binoculars. Ball sampling, which is using a Velcro-coated racquetball shot by a dog ball launcher, which you kind of cast through the tree, and that Velcro coated around the racquetball will collect the wool from the hemlock woolly adelgid in the upper canopy. This allows us to collect from the upper canopy and get samples from up there. And again, migratory birds would be thought to be the primary source of spread, roosting in that upper canopy, so that's where we perceive the initial infestation. We have interception traps, which are basically just little sticky traps that catch anything that falls down from the tree, and eDNA sampling, which I'm very proud that we got 15 eDNA traps up on the landscape in Prince Edward Island this year, so really happy to have that monitoring tool deployed. So I'll just go over our simplest monitoring technique, visual sampling, because that's what most of you will probably be doing. So this is just going out to the woods looking for those little cotton balls, those little white oga sacs at the base of needles on the undersides of twigs, usually in the outer canopy of the hemlock trees, and again, usually in the upper canopy. So the timing, it's prime time to do this. From March to May is your ideal time to conduct monitoring for hemlock woolly adelgid. That's when it's most visible. You want to select the tallest trees. Again, those are the most attractive to birds. Those are the signs of stress, they may already be affected. Those at the stand's edge are those along waterways first. You want to examine the tree again, especially the undersides of the branches for hemlock woolly adelgid, and focus on the outer 1 meter of the branch. So examine as many trees as you're willing. If you're not going to monitor every tree, do kind of a zigzag pattern, put 50 steps at least between the trees. It's not an exact science, we just are hoping people will get it in the landscape in any case. And if you do see Hemlock woolly adelgid, well, we don't want you to bring that out of the area. We want you to report that to us. So there is a chance that it might fall on your clothes and be transported out there. So if you are going into an area where you know Hemlock woolly adelgid is around or potentially around, bring a lint brush and you can kind of lint brush off your clothes to get any bugs that may fall on them. So comb collection. Well, this is kind of like a worst case scenario type thing. So in the event that Hemlock woolly adelgid arrives on Prince Edward Island and we experience essentially a functional extinction of hemlock on Prince Edward Island, we want to have some sort of genetic repository of genetic material, so we would have at least a chance of reintroducing hemlock onto the landscape after the Hemlock woolly adelgid has kind of eaten itself out of house and home. So we hope that you can look out for cones. If you see your hemlock trees in heavy cone, we're working with the National Tree Seed Center out of Fredericton to store genetic material at their facility from Prince Edward Island. So we're hoping to get nice, big, mature trees with good growth characteristics, and also trees that may have sort of unique growth characteristics. Perhaps they're growing coastally, perhaps they're growing a little strange. We want to collect a lot of genetic material, basically. It's usually the cones in the upper canopy that are the best. So the National Tree Seed Center would be coming to the property to collect those trees. They'd be climbing the tree, collecting cones from the upper canopy, and they collect a big gallon, 4-gallon bucket of seed per tree. So it's a lot of seed. So if you're interested in getting involved, if you have hemlocks on your property, look out for this. On the very far left, those green cones, that's when we really want to hear about it. This will give us a chance to get out and plan our trip over to the property. They kind of get a bit of a dusky color. This is not an eastern hemlock here, just a kind of a similar picture. And on the far right, this, when they just start to brown and open up, is the ideal time to collect those cones. So if you have cones, let us know for sure. These are some older cones, some cones that we wouldn't want to collect because they've already released their seed, but old cones and new cones can actually persist on the same branch, as you can see in the top right there. This is a cone cut test. I gotta say, I'm not an expert here. I can't really read this test myself, but I've been told that this is a good result. So if you cut your cone and it looks like this, well, you've got a good cone cut test, a high degree of viable seed in there. So there are some things you can do in your woodlot to reduce the effects of Hemlock woolly adelgid and prepare your woodlot for that onset. Properly managed eastern hemlock stands can create conditions that are favorable for increased resilience of your trees, and they do this in two ways: by improving the health of the individual trees and reducing the health of the Hemlock woolly adelgid. So let's just talk a little bit about these things. So general promotion of hemlock health through regionally recommended silvicultural practices is a good thing to do. Just make sure your trees are healthy. Thinning your stands can actually promote the vigor of the individual hemlocks that are remaining. And they've done pretty extensive study of this in the United States. They found that stands that are thin, the trees remaining are significantly more resilient and last a longer period of time under infestation from Hemlock woolly adelgid. But this hasn't been studied yet in Canada, so I can't confirm that the results will be able to be replicated here. Don't fertilize your hemlocks with nitrogen. I don't know anybody who does that, but don't do it if you are. Make hemlocks unattractive to visiting wildlife, so if you have bird feeders and such around there, perhaps remove those structures from the area. And you can also increase the level of direct sunlight which is hitting the hemlock branches. Hemlock woolly adelgid, like other organisms that rely on hemlock, like those dark and cool conditions which are created by that. So increasing the level of light that's hitting those branches by 30 to 50% has been shown to decrease the effects of Hemlock woolly adelgid, and that would kind of go along with crown release or general thinning practices. So this would certainly affect other species that rely on the dark and cool conditions which are relied upon by hemlock, but what would affect those species more is the complete loss of hemlock. So it's got to pick your battles and choose the lesser of the two evils, as you could say. You can also improve diversity in your forested stands. A pure stand, it can really just go from tree to tree very easily, but if there's, say, a few sugar maples or a stand of beech in between your hemlocks, well, it's much less likely that, well, it would probably be a slower transition from tree to tree if you had diversity there. Salvage cutting in the face of this guy is not recommended because, for two main reasons. Salvage cutting would promote a very rapid shift of ecosystem characteristics, so the the ecosystem will be more drastically affected by the salvage cutting than it would be the loss of hemlock under Hemlock woolly adelgid. We also don't recommend it because if the tree is never exposed to Hemlock woolly adelgid, then we can never know if it's resistant. And if, say, a stand was completely clear cut, we would never know if there was a resistant tree in there. But if it was the same stand is exposed to Hemlock woolly adelgid, and say 20 years later there was just one hemlock tree standing left, that could be a resistant tree, and we may want to breed that tree thereafter. So yeah, this is just some photos from the silvicultural control project that they're doing in Nova Scotia, trying to replicate those results from the United States here in Canada. If you want to know more about that, it's on the nshemlock.ca website. You can check that out. So what would happen if Hemlock woolly adelgid arrived on Prince Edward Island? Federal agencies don't have anything specific for PEI, but I do. So eradication efforts have been made in Ontario, in Etobicoke, and Niagara, Georgia, and I would want to probably try something like that on PEI. So basically, in a small infestation, once Hemlock woolly adelgid is reported, CFIA would come out to the property, they'd take a sample, they'd send it to their entomology lab in Ontario, and they would basically confirm that we have an infestation here on Prince Edward Island. A delimitation survey would be conducted, so we would try to find out the extent of the infestation around that area. And once we find the total size of the infestation, we will take action based on that. If the infestation is small enough, then perhaps we could conduct some sort of mechanical eradication, so removing the trees, burying them or incinerating them on site, and then improving surveying and chemical treatment around the area for the next at least 5 to 10 years. In a larger infestation, we would shift away from eradication and more towards just controlling the spread, trying to preserve what we can on the landscape. And the best tool that we have right now is chemical treatment. So chemical treatment, there's 3 main products: 2 are neonicotinoids, dimethyl and Imajet is the trade name. Yeah, not going to come to me. And azadirachtin, which is a neem-derived insecticide. So we have 2 main application methods: trunk-injected insecticides and basal bark sprays. And the impacts to nearby wildlife has been shown, at least to this point, to be fairly minimal, so that's a positive. So biological control release would be considered as well. This is basically the release of a predator. So it kind of sounds like a slippery slope. This is an introduced species, and we're introducing another species to combat it. But this is a very heavily regulated process. It happens predominantly in the native range of the species, and it's currently happening in out west in BC, where the Hemlock woolly adelgid is actually native. So they've introduced a couple of beetles. Leucobius nigrinus is the beetle that they've introduced into Nova Scotia. So they've released, I think, 5,000 of those so far. And that is the long-term solution, to introduce some predators into the area that will keep their numbers down over time. So what do you do if you see Hemlock woolly adelgid? Well, take photos, mark the location, and get in touch ASAP. We really need to hear about it as soon as possible. We want to get the essence of this stuff, so get in touch with me by any of the means listed on the screen here. Primarily email, I would say, would be my best way to get a hold of me. That's my personal cell, so don't sell it to any robocallers if you don't mind. And you can also get a hold of us on social media too. If you are getting out and doing monitoring, you can download the Survey 123 app. Basically, this will allow you to submit your data from your phone directly to us. It's a very easy download. There's no ads on your phone or anything like that. And there is a link on our website to access this form as well. It's important to report even when you don't find it, because the work has still been done. If you're more of a pen and paper type person, this is our monitoring data sheet, or physical data sheet, so you can record, if you're not really a smartphone person, your data during your hemlock monitoring process. And just recap, report all known eastern hemlock populations to the PEIWA if you don't mind. Implement good silvicultural control practices, monitor your stands, and report heavy cone. So finally, thanks for having me out here. My name is Clay, and I'm with the PEIWA. So if you have any questions, I'll just be over to you.